Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really getting into something fundamental, home ownership, and building wealth over generations.
Especially for immigrants.
Yeah.
We're looking at how they navigate these systems that, well, historically and even now, can really limit their economic reach.
Right. So our deep dive today is navigating that path. We've got some pretty stark structural data, big wealth gaps in the U.S.
Massive gaps, yeah. But we're going to contrast that with just an incredible real-world story, someone who completely defied those odds.
A story starting from extreme poverty.
Literally a dirt floor shack, and ending up running a global private equity firm. It's quite the journey.
That contrast, that's really the heart of the material today, isn't it? We've got sources on discriminatory U.S. land laws, shifts in FHA policy.
Data from Europe showing these startling wealth differences, housing comparisons in North America.
And this specific story, it really covers the hurdles and the hustle involved.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Maybe start at the beginning. In the U.S., I mean. These historical barriers weren't accidental.
No, they seem really foundational, intentional. You mentioned these alien land laws.
Exactly. And what's fascinating, or, well, disturbing, is how they were written. They looked kind of neutral.
On the surface.
Right. But they were definitely aimed at exclusion. They were quite clever in a dark way.
How so?
They didn't necessarily name specific countries. Instead, they used this phrase, aliens ineligible for citizenship.
And that connects back to other laws.
Precisely. It linked directly to the Naturalization Act of 1870, which specifically blocked Chinese and Japanese immigrants from becoming citizens.
So control citizenship, control land rights.
That was the mechanism. If you couldn't become a citizen, you couldn't own land, you couldn't really put down permanent roots.
Which stops you building that generational infrastructure, owning the land you farm. That's the real economic hit, isn't it?
That was the goal. They wanted to prevent permanent settlement by non-Europeans. California is a prime example.
What happened there?
Well, in 1913, a law banned these ineligible aliens from owning land or even signing leases longer than 3 years.
3 years. You can't invest much with a timeline like that.
Barely anything. And then it got tighter.
It escalated.
Oh, yeah. By 1920, California made any lease illegal for them. Even corporations owned by them couldn't buy land.
Wow. And this wasn't just California.
No, it spread. Look at Arkansas in 1943. They passed a law specifically saying no Japanese or a descendant of a Japanese could buy land. Much more direct wording there.
That really shows the specific resentment, doesn't it? Not just anti-immigrant feeling, but targeting specific groups known for their success, especially in farming.
Absolutely. It was fueled by that whole yellow peril narrative you saw in newspapers and from politicians back then, resentment of success.
So this exclusion, even though the laws were eventually struck down, it set a pattern. Denying access to real estate, which has always been, a primary way to build wealth in America.
A very powerful precedent. And while the language is different today, the hurdles haven't vanished. They've just sort of morphed into financial policy.
Okay, so let's shift to the present day. The U.S. financial landscape, FHA loans specifically. These are often the go-to for first-time buyers, right? Or people needing lower down payments.
They're crucial, yeah. And that's where a recent policy change becomes a pretty significant barrier.
What changed?
FHA loans used to be open to a wider group of legal residents, but now they're restricted. Only available to lawful permanent residents, green card holders, and U.S. citizens.
Okay, so let's think about who that affects. Someone on, say, an H-1B work visa, highly skilled, here legally, but not permanent resident yet.
They might be excluded now. Or someone granted asylum or refugee status who's on the path to a green card but doesn't have it yet.
Suddenly, that main accessible loan path is closed off. So what happens then? What are their options?
It pushes them towards what you might call creative financing, which almost always means it's more expensive.
Right.
If they can't get an FHA loan, they might need a conventional loan. Higher down payment needed, there's stricter credit requirements.
Manageable for some, maybe, but a huge hurdle if your income is lower or you're still building credit here.
A huge obstacle. Now, there are alternatives, even for undocumented immigrants sometimes. ITIN loans, using a taxpayer ID number.
I've heard of those. But they're not easy either, are they?
Not at all. The lenders see higher risk, so the borrowers face higher barriers. We're talking down payments of maybe 20% or even more.
Wow, compared to FHA's low single digits.
Exactly. And the interest rates are significantly higher, too. So just because of immigration status, the cost to get in the door, the monthly cost, it all jumps up dramatically.
It's a whole different financial climb.
It is. Though it's worth noting, DACA recipients did become eligible again for FHA loans in 2021, so policy can shift back and forth.
Yeah.
But the overall trend has been towards tightening.
Okay. It's easy to frame this as just a U.S. issue, but you mentioned data from Europe, from the European Central Bank.
Yeah, this really shows that it's a global structural thing. The ECB data confirms immigrants in the euro area earn, on average, about 30% less in wages than native-born people.
30% lower wages. Okay.
But the wealth gap, the net wealth, so assets minus debts, that difference is way bigger. Immigrants hold roughly 60% less net wealth than native households.
60%. Wow. That's almost two-thirds less capital accumulated.
What's driving that huge difference? Is it just education levels or the types of jobs they have?
Well, that's actually the most crucial finding in this ECB research. And it really makes you rethink how you'd try to fix it.
How so?
Only about 30% of that massive 60% wealth gap can be explained by those observable things like age, education, the job they do.
Wait, only 30%?
Yeah.
So what accounts for the other 70%? That's the vast majority of the gap.
They call them unexplained factors, which is quite a category. It could be cultural differences in saving or investing, family beliefs, or, and this is significant, discrimination. Barriers that stop them getting equity or accessing the same opportunities. That 70%, that's where the hidden friction is, the systemic stuff.
Exactly. It suggests that just getting more qualifications or a better job title might not be enough to close that gap. 7% of the disadvantage comes from somewhere else.
That makes building wealth feel like a totally different kind of challenge.
And it leads directly to financial fragility. The data also showed non-EU-born immigrants are much more likely to be hand-to-mouth. Meaning they have very little liquid savings. Cash, easily accessible money, enough for less than 2 weeks of their income.
How many are in that situation?
About 29% of non-EU-born immigrants. Compare that to only 17% of natives.
So nearly a third are living right on the edge. If you have less than 2 weeks income saved, saving up 20% for a down payment, that seems almost impossible.
It makes that dream of ownership feel incredibly distant. Really highlights the vulnerability.
Okay, let's bring this back to North America. There was a study comparing Canada and the U.S., right? Looking at homeownership for different immigrant groups.
Yes. Tracked 5 racial and ethnic groups: Black, Chinese, Filipino, South Asian, and white immigrants. And it helps us understand 2 key ideas for you, the listener.
Which are?
The difference between start point disparities and attainment rates.
Okay, so like where you begin financially when you arrive versus how quickly you catch up or climb after you get here.
Precisely. And the study confirms a sort of hierarchy. Chinese and white immigrants generally end up with the highest homeownership rates in both countries, sometimes even higher than native-born households.
And on the other.
Black immigrants consistently show the lowest rates, especially in the U.S.
So what's the main takeaway about those start points versus attainment rates?
The really big insight is that most of the differences we see in homeownership levels between these groups, they stem from the differences that exist right when they arrive or very shortly after.
So it's more about the financial position they start with rather than them progressing at vastly different speeds once they're here.
Largely, yes. Once they arrive, most groups tend to advance into homeownership over time at roughly similar rates compared to white immigrants. The speed of attainment is often comparable.
Interesting. So starting advantage or disadvantage is huge.
It seems to be the dominant factor in the level of ownership achieved. Although the study did note that Black immigrants in the U.S. showed the smallest increases in ownership over time, suggesting slower attainment as well in that specific context.
So if you arrive with some wealth or access to capital,
you're much more likely to get into homeownership faster, even if there are still ongoing challenges.
But what's the overall trend? Is it getting easier or harder for immigrants to catch up?
The picture there is a bit concerning. Convergence, that catch-up rate, it seems to have slowed down over time for almost all groups in both Canada and the U.S.
So the gap isn't closing as fast as it used to?
Apparently not, though you see interesting exceptions like Chinese immigrants arriving in Canada in the late 1980s. They actually started with higher homeownership rates than natives almost immediately.
Really?
Suggests they likely arrived with significant wealth already. A very favorable starting point.
Okay, we've hit the historical barriers, the policy issues like FHA loans, the big macro data like that 60% wealth gap.
And the nuances of starting points versus catch-up speed.
Right. But now we need to balance all that systemic stuff with, well, the power of individual drive. Yeah. Which brings us to this case study, Carlos Reyes.
Yes, Carlos Reyes. His story starts in about the deepest poverty imaginable. Guimas, Sonora, Mexico.
Describe it.
He grew up in this tiny shack under 400 square feet, Dirt floors, no running water, no electricity. They used butane gas lamps for light. His mother cleaned hotel rooms, maybe made $12 a week.
$12 a week. That puts the data, like the 60% gap, into such a stark personal light. But something happened early on, right? A visit to the U.S.
Yeah, a pivotal moment. He visited California when he was 7. He talks about seeing green grass for the first time at some apartments. He just rolled around in it.
The pure amazement.
Total amazement. He said he was convinced right then America is everything that everybody used to say it was.
Yeah.
That image, that feeling, it became like this internal driver for him.
And back in Mexico, he didn't just wait. He started working young.
Incredibly young. He effectively became the family's main breadwinner by age 10.
10 years old. How?
Bagging groceries at a store, mostly for American tourists.
Yeah.
He was making $10 or $12 a day.
Well, his mother made that much in a week.
Exactly. Just relentless hustle from the start.
And that hustle carried him when he finally made it to the U.S. He arrived in Phoenix.
Second attempt was successful, yeah. In 1996, he was 12, cost $25 to a coyote he had to get across. And his mother, her work ethic in the U.S. was just intense.
What'd she do?
Multiple jobs, constantly. Graveyard shift, dishwasher at the airport, making maybe $8.25 an hour max. Then a daytime job as a cafeteria lady, plus side hustles, like buying and selling things nonstop.
He saw that example constantly.
Absolutely. That level of grit, that resourcefulness born from necessity.
So with that background, that drive, how did he make his own big move? Did he go the traditional route, education, corporate job?
No, he went straight for Capitol building.
Yeah.
Real estate.
Mm.
But in a very unconventional way initially.
How did he start?
Around age 29 or 30, he read a book about flipping houses. Just one book. He had no money, no credit score to speak of.
So how do you flip a house with no money or credit?
Bandit signs. He went out and put up 2,400 of those signs. You know, the "We Buy Houses Cash" type signs.
2,400 for his first deal? That's serious legwork.
Brutal effort. But it worked. He landed one deal from those 2,400 signs.
Didn't the payoff?
$5,000 profit.
Wow.
And that $5,000, he said, that proved to him the system could work, even starting from zero. It was accessible if you just pushed hard enough. So he scaled up fast.
And how successful did he become?
Monumentally. He tells the story of buying a Rolls-Royce Wraith just 5 years after that first $5,000 deal.
5 years. From bandit signs to a Rolls-Royce.
Yeah. And today, he runs a private equity firm. Global operations, business process, outsourcing, generating tens of millions a year in revenue.
That's incredible. And when he talks about why he succeeded,
he points to things like vision, grit, hustle, creativity, and resourcefulness.
Which brings us right back to that European data, doesn't it? That mysterious 70% of the wealth gap.
Exactly. It wasn't his starting income or his formal education. It was those unobservable factors, that internal capital. His story is almost a case study of that 70%.
So the takeaway here feels pretty clear. The barriers are undeniable. The historical laws, the current FHA policies, that 60% wealth gap. It's all real, it's measurable, it's substantial.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But so is the potential for incredible advancement, often fueled, paradoxically, by the very challenges and necessities that poverty creates. That grit factor is powerful.
So thinking about this for you, the listener, if you're navigating these kinds of complex systems, trying to build wealth, what's the key insight? We've seen that the measurable stuff, your education, your age, your job title, it only explained about 30% the difference in wealth outcomes for immigrants.
Right. The other 70% seems to be driven by those internal, maybe invisible factors. The hustle, the mindset, the resourcefulness.
So here's a final thought building on that. Given that reality, how much strategic importance should you place on maximizing that unobservable capital, your grit, your hustle, your creativity, building your network intentionally?
Especially when facing these complex economic and systemic headwinds. Is focusing only on credentials or climbing the standard ladder potentially missing the biggest part of the equation, the part that explains 70% of the outcome?
Something to definitely mull over. Thanks for joining us for the deep dive.